Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. I'm James and you are watching Wonderful World. And I think when a lot of us think of bioactive vivariums, we picture the highly planted, high humidity tropical vivariums like those for animals like frogs and geckos. And I find those types of vivariums to be the easiest for maintaining bioactivity because the super high humidity and lower temperatures are ideal for keeping microfauna alive and growing plants. But that type of environment is not healthy for a large majority of snake species. And in the warmer and drier enclosures that most snakes need, maintaining a healthy bioactive environment can be a bit more challenging. But with some experimentation and a few adjustments, I've worked out some ways for myself to get around that. So in today's video, I'm going to go over how I do bioactive for snakes. And to do that, we're going to give my king snake Rex a bioactive upgrade. So what is a bioactive vivarium? A bioactive vivarium is an attempt to recreate a balanced living ecosystem inside the vivarium. Your snake is not the only living thing in the vivarium. There are also crustaceans and insects like isopods, springtails, millipedes, and beetles and worms that feed on decaying organic matter. That includes your animal's waste products and also any uneaten leftover food and leaf litter and mold and other fungi. And there are also microscopic fungi and bacteria in the substrate that also work to break down organic matter. And you have plants feeding off the products of all this decaying organic matter. And as you miss the vivarium and that water goes through the soil and into the drainage layer, then that also becomes part of this system. Bioactivity and bioactive vivariums are often misunderstood, and what bioactive enclosures are not is one, they can be creative and beautiful to look at, but they don't necessarily have to be. And two, they aren't just putting some substrate in a tank and throwing in some isopods and springtails and forgetting about it. There's a bit more that has to go into monitoring the conditions and keeping everything balanced so that it remains as a living ecosystem. And three, they are not self-cleaning enclosures that don't require any spot cleaning or other maintenance that any other reptile enclosure might need. Although definitely less cleaning involved than with a sterile enclosure. I like to manage the heat for my snakes with a combination of a heat mat underneath the warm side hide and a heat lamp for the basking spot. And obviously a thick layer of bioactive substrate doesn't allow for an under tank heat mat. So what I do is use pieces of wood or rocks to create a barrier around the warm side hide. Then on the warm side, I put just a super thin layer of just coconut coir or reptibark, and then fill the rest of the enclosure with a thick layer of ABG mix. This not only creates a thermal gradient for my snakes, but a humidity gradient as well. So in about the last third of the cool side, I put in a thin layer of sphagnum moss on top of the substrate. And this will help hold some humidity and add some hiding places and food for the microfauna. Since this is going to be a drier vivarium, I don't worry about putting in a drainage layer. Ideally, I'll mist the enclosure just enough to keep the bottom layers of the substrate barely moist and the very top just slightly dry. If I mist this enclosure enough to need a drainage layer, then I would be creating an environment that would be unhealthy for this particular snake. I have a previous video on how to make my ABG mix, and here in the corner is a link to that video. I usually make a really big batch of it and keep it in a tub in my garage, and I always add a good amount of compost from the bottommost layers of my compost bin by my garden. And I know that ends up putting in some isopods and springtails, and I often see other things like centipedes and worms, and I put the compost in there to add a healthy start of all the microorganisms that work in that kind of system. I have some holes drilled in the lid of that tub, and every now and then I turn it over just like I would for the compost pile. And I try to do it so that all the organisms in the soil are reproducing and doing their thing while it sits in my garage waiting for me to make a new vivarium. So after putting in the substrate, I added a few pothos plants, some leaf litter, and the microfauna. And for custodians, I've added some isopods, some springtails, and some superworms. The worms will do a really good job of cleaning, but once they morph into beetles, the beetles will do even better. I put in the same turtle shells hides that Rex has gotten used to, and the tubes of birch bark that he loves. And he's growing fast, but he's still a pretty small snake, so I put 2 small water dishes in the enclosure just to make sure he has plenty of access to find water. Since this enclosure will be warmer and drier than a vivarium for a tropical species, it becomes a little bit more challenging to keep the custodians alive. King snakes only need a humidity level of around 50%, and they do need a basking spot around 90 degrees and a warm side around 85 to 87 degrees, but the cool side can be in the low to mid 70s. So I'll miss this enclosure a little bit, about once a week, and occasionally overflow the water dishes just a little bit. This should be enough to take care of the microfauna, but I'll still need to refresh the populations of microfauna with new ones every once in a while. This isn't anything close to what a California king snake's natural habitat is like, but Rex doesn't have to know that. And at some point when Rex is fully grown, I'll probably move him into a larger enclosure and try to make it an exact replica of the California king snake's natural habitat. But for now, this is the first time Rex has been on anything other than aspen bedding, and definitely the first time he's ever encountered plants, and he is just intrigued by it. Rex has been getting really well accustomed to me and to being handled, and the more time I spend with him, the more I love him. And I'm sure a change in his environment is going to be something that he'll have to get used to, but I think once he settles in, he's going to be very happy with it. So I hope you've enjoyed the video. I'll leave you with some footage of Rex checking out his new space. And as always, until the next video, I look forward to seeing you again real soon.